So I want to reach out to the audience. Are there questions that you might have? We've certainly got a few more, but I wanted to see if there's something specific that you would like the panel to respond to. If you could stand up and just speak up.
So is there really a life cycle to the data? You know, they always talked about ILM, like information life cycle management. There is a create stage, there is a manage phase, and then there is a retire or accelerate phase. So with the with all the things that you guys mentioned, is there really a life cycle to the data? Is there no longer in existence?
Sure.
I'll tell you my perspective of it. I think organizations that get this right treat data as a living asset within their organization. And as a result, there's no retirement of that cycle. It continues to evolve, it continues to enhance, it continues to get augmented as more and more contextual data becomes available. But I don't think we think about data as a starting point and an ending point. I think, especially when we think about governance of that data, it's an ongoing exercise that is designed to never end, right? Because I think what you'll find is there's so many applications of it, and you've probably heard the term now that data is the new currency, right? And having data that's a living, breathing asset within your enterprise, I don't think you think about it as on a maturity curve that eventually dies out. I think you think about it as, I've got this informational asset, and it's a responsibility of the organization to nurture it, to grow it, to protect it from security perspective, but to keep it alive and keep it going within the organization.
Yeah, and I think there are technology reasons for that, right? It used to be
Yes,
expensive
that's what I was
to
gonna
store
say. Yeah,
data.
exactly right. No, that's fine. You can totally
Right,
do
but it
it.
used to be expensive to store data, so we had to sort of be selective about what we kept because we just didn't have enough room in the closet for all the clothes, you know. But now storage is so darn cheap, and the physical ability to manipulate what is stored is so much greater. You know, we can afford to do that, and you know, it opens up all kinds of possibilities in terms of, especially where we've got systems that are learning from longitudinal data, right?
Correct.
So
Absolutely. And we know already that the historic data is such a small percentage of the data that we're getting right now that it wouldn't make sense to retire it, if you will, because I think there could be really interesting insights in there.
I think the thing is information has a life cycle because it starts out, it grows, and then eventually it becomes irrelevant. So the information has a life cycle, not necessarily the data having a life cycle. It's an infinite possibility.
Yeah, I think for information to be valuable, to your point, it has to be the right information at the right time, right? And if that right time has passed, that information isn't as relevant as it was before. But I still think having the underlying data will allow you to continuously generate new hypotheses and new contextual analytics that will continue to be valuable.
Yeah, that's
right.
exactly
And
right.
we talked about all of majority of the data that we have was literally created in the last 2 years. So if we're really talking about data at the big data scale, right, historical data is going to be such a small percentage of it that it just behooves us to continue to store it and continue to use it.
Other questions from the audience? Yes.
Can you speak to state organizations moving toward these interactive user interfaces? Are they always, I know we're going to more of a cloud environment for hosting both the application and your data, but are many organizations utilizing their own legacy hardware for hosting their own smart applications?
Yeah. Let me take a whack at it from a state California perspective. Yeah, I think the days of rip and replace the legacy there may be a need for that at some point, but it's really a business decision, right? Because in many cases, the engines that have been built here in government, the legacy applications, they still do the calculations the way we need them to. They still perform a lot of the functions that we need to. What is not working any longer is the way users and in public-facing applications, the way constituents want to access and use that information. And so what we're seeing as a trend, really, you're seeing it in child welfare as an example. They're leveraging the legacy data, enhancing new data sets where appropriate, but putting a front end on there that starts to take into account a more user-centric engagement, right? I mean, you could think about the airlines where the old reservation system mainframes, and if you think about it, and I can, 25 years ago, when you're flying, I mean, these were archaic user experiences. And now when I go on Southwest or I go on United, I get all kinds of things that they push to me. My experience is great, but you know what? Much of the underlying engine is still that same system that was there before. So I think as you think about it, in the state of California, you're going to start seeing some of the legacy apps will get replaced. There's got to be ability to support it. But absent that, it's more of a business decision on the program side to determine when it's appropriate to retire that asset. Because you can now, with the new interfaces with systems, microservices, and the ability to create a new experience from the legacy systems you have, your clients or your users and anybody that your stakeholders that work with you will not see and know that the back end is still maybe a mainframe database or a client server app in some cases. So I see this as a business decision more than a need to, now we got to move to all new.
Yeah.
And I see that there's a tremendous amount of techniques and technologies that allow you to do that in an effective and cost-effective way. And we're seeing it at the state of California as we speak. We're seeing it in local government throughout the state and around the country. So I think there's opportunity to get to those new experiences in an iterative way that doesn't require you to think about the big bang programs of the past. So we're seeing both of them, but we're seeing a lot more people seeing how they can make that legacy solution work so long as it's still supportable and maintainable.
Yep. I was going to say we're
Did
seeing.
that answer your question? I'm sorry. I mean,
I was going to say we're seeing it in private sector as well, and what we're always trying to do from our perspective is we don't focus on the technology to begin with. So we'll focus on what the user actually needs, and then we go through an exercise to figure out, okay, how do we do that? So how do we enable that to happen? And a lot of times, most organizations have a lot of the technology already there, and it's figuring out how to pull data from over here and another system over here into a compelling user experience, and that's where we spend a lot of our time now.
Yeah, I think just one thing I would add, this is typical Accenture, by the way, piling on, right? Everybody has something they want to say. And a thing that I would add is sort of also the life cycle of the development process, right? So one of the things that we're seeing people do a lot more these days, it used to be if you wanted to put in a new system, you had to make a large investment, and there was a long stand-up time associated with that. So sort of this idea of rent to own, that is, I'm going to find a place where I can bring in some machine data or some device data, I can do some analytics, I can do a fast test, fast fail kind of a thing, get some good solid feedback from the end users, and then say, okay, yeah, this is working, now I need to scale it, now I need to I need to integrate it with other existing systems. Is the right thing to do a new environment, or is it to build on the existing environment? But, leveraging some things that make sort of the sandbox a lot cheaper, so that you can, sort of get that going and determine what you want to do before you make large investments. So it's not a one over the other. It's sort of a use a hammer when you need a hammer, use a screwdriver when you need a screwdriver kind of a thing.
Yep.
Yeah, and I'll add one point to it, because I think in some cases it certainly makes sense to keep the legacy system if it's still fulfilling the function that you need it to fulfill. But I think if you've got requirements around accessibility around the planet, if you've got scalability concerns, if you've got those kinds of concerns, then it makes sense to start thinking about the cloud infrastructures, because both environments will have a cost of ownership. And you need to think about that cost of ownership and combine it with the cost of transition to something new. I think the trend that cloud enables of interagency collaboration, of really having scalability where you can evolve and scale your infrastructure as you go, I think is one of the key drivers that's pushing a lot of those systems there, just because it makes sense to add those kinds of features. I think the other big trend that's important is the whole concept of software as a service, right? It used to be that all the software vendors wanted to sell you was an enterprise license, right? But it doesn't really operate that way anymore. Now it's about you rent the software instead of you buying the software. So if I think about like the Accenture Insights platform, which is a pre-built cloud-based platform that we've stood up that allows you to come in, rent the cloud environment, rent the visual analytic tools, and pay a monthly fee for that rent and use it as much as you want. And if you need to scale it up or scale it down, you have the flexibility to do that. And I think that model is fundamentally different from the previous model where you spent a bunch of upfront costs buying a bunch of licenses and then realizing maybe you don't have the adoption that you needed, right? And I think changes both in the technological capability of things like cloud as well as the model of software as a service is two of the primary reasons we're seeing a shift from legacy to the new world.
So I'm going to ask everybody, how many in the room are from the IT departments? Raise your hand. How many are from the program side of the equation? So it kind of begs the next question, right, that I think should be asked is, what is the role and what is the relationship between IT and the program areas? And who owns it? Is there an ownership, or is this a more federated approach? So I'd be interested, maybe, Steve, if you can kick it off, on your perspective, on who owns this, because it's something we grapple with every day here, right? But I'd be interested in your perspective.
Before Steve, sorry.
Yeah, sure.
I want to add something to that, which is interesting to me. Can you please tie in the cross-functional team to this question?
Sure, absolutely. I was going to go there. So in the agile world, or iterative or lean or DevOps or whatever it is, there needs to be an owner. And that owner should be tied to the end result, which is the consumer or the customer or the citizen in this case. So whoever is responsible to the citizen and understanding what the citizen needs in that moment should own the service. And I know this is not going to be popular with the IT guys, so I apologize in advance, but IT is a supporting function in that regard most of the time. But so is ops, so is marketing in any other organization, and everything else. But whoever is responsible for ensuring the delivery of a service to the end user is responsible for ensuring that that service is doing what it's supposed to do. Now, IT has a huge role in that to ensure that the vision is actually actionable, is real, is cost conscious, all of those things. Because what we've seen, at least historically, especially in the private sector, is that technology was always blamed for everything, right? No, it's true. I worked in technology for a long time. When I was at BGI, I was on the technology side, and every time anything went wrong, it was like, oh, those guys screwed up. And then there's what the requirements were this, and blah, and it's a completely useless exercise. So you need to hold accountable the person that's responsible for delivering the service or the product to the consumer. And then they can make the business-informed decision on budgets and everything that is associated and the business case for doing a given piece of work. Everyone else then has the ability to engage in that conversation, but you have to push that ownership to wherever the budget is coming from.
So, Steve, did you want to address the other question related
Oh,
to?
so I would say any initiative has to have that cross-functional team. There needs to be the clearly defined business owner of the problem space and all of the supporting functions underneath that. So that'll be folks from technology, whether that's data, whether that's networking, whether that's cloud or whoever. They need to be in the room. You need to have the operational program support people that actually understand how things actually happen in the field. They need to be involved. You get that cross-functional team to come up with the best result possible to deliver the end result to the user. Yeah.
Any questions from the audience?
I work for a county human services organization, and I'm really struck by your comments about sort of the kind of digital transformation or sort of cultural transformation that has to happen within an organization. And we're sort of embarked on this task now. I guess the one question is, how would you recommend that digital transformation tasked to just see customers, right? They're not necessarily tasked to, innovate or iterate or have an opportunity to really, do some of the data exploration, despite the fact that they are in some ways the end users. Sorry.
Do you want me to?
No,
we totally heard you.
I think, let me kick it, I think that one of the things that I took from Manish's talk this morning, and I think is so important, and it's so important for the people in this room, is that there has to be a leader that's going to go push on this envelope, right? And the reason for that is because the folks in the room that actually are going to go actually execute the effort have to have the support, right? So I think that your point, Manish, that it's not so much specific to a specific program area within government, it's more unique to the leaders that are willing to take that step forward. So as I start this conversation off to try to answer your question, I think one of the key elements to make this transformation is that you have to have a leader that's supportive of a subset of your teams to get involved in starting to look at the problem in a very different way, right? So leadership could not be, I can't understate how important it is to have a leader that's going to allow you, because your job description, and we're not going to fix that issue, that's been worked on for the last 25 years since I've been working with the state of California. And we've made progress, but I think if we wait for that to get resolved, we won't ever get to where I think the end result can take us. So I think leadership is important, and then I'll pass it on to the team, because I think that's so important on where we're seeing people step forward in the state area. It's because their leaders have given them the permission to go out and in some cases fail fast and iterate to a better product over time, right? So I'll pass it on to Manish.
On job descriptions, first of all, right? I think how many of you either have or have a team that has got the word analyst in their job title? Right? I think it is the most genericized title, right? There's so many analysts that work for every organization that are doing really anything but analysis, right? I think the way to drive cultural transformation is actually having a team that is focused on true analysis. And it's not just about data. It's about taking a look at data. It's about taking a look at the business process that's being followed. It's about taking a look at the experience that's being generated. But having a leader to sponsor an actual analysis team and using the proof of concept approach as opposed to the analysis paralysis approach that we talked about, I think are the ways that you can push this agenda forward, right? It's about getting meaningful bite-sized wins that show the value of it, that generate momentum of it, that's going to allow you to transform it in a larger scale.
You want to go?
Go ahead,
I was going
Rob.
to snowball on top of him.
Yeah.
So I think one of the things when you're thinking about that, and one of the things that I've recommended throughout my career, and because I've seen it work, is don't just pick small, meaningless little projects to try this out on. Pick the hairiest, gnarliest, most visible problem and run it through that process, because then people start to pay attention and they say, they're doing something different over there. So if you're taking a design-led approach or a design thinking approach, there's going to be the way the workspace transforms is fundamental, and people start looking around. They're like, what are they doing over there? That's not how we work. And then they start building a lot of change within the organization just because they're more visible and they're more different, and they're solving the gnarliest problem that everyone else stepped away from. And what usually happens, I would say almost every time we've attempted this, is that project is a success because you are coming at it from a different lens. You are given the leeway to reframe the problem. So that's one of the first things that we look to do is we get a problem and then we go, but what if it's this? What if it's that? And we spend some time thinking about, are we even really addressing the right thing? And we try to go to the end user to understand it. But having that kind of visibility is really important. And it sounds counterintuitive in a large organization like the state, but we encounter this in every organization we're in, and it's always that the flaming hot problem that everyone's terrified of is usually the best project to push on to make it happen.
So in the interest of time and getting the proverbial hook off the stage, I've got one last question to kind of close this out. And before I do, Well, I'm going to ask it, I apologize, but we can take your question after, and we're going to be here, so if you have questions, please feel free. But I did want to thank everybody in the room for attending. I appreciate your support, and we're going to be here after, so if you've got questions, please feel free to come up and ask the panel. But I'm going to close this on one last question, and I need you to all be brief, my colleagues at Accenture. So to close, what advice would you have for leaders in the room as they continue on their journey to building out their information management strategies? Give them one takeaway, John, that you would give them as they go down their journey.
Think big, start small, scale fast.
Great. Steve?
So I would kind of reiterate that with the great power that is big data and analytics comes great responsibility. And so always think of your citizens that you're serving as your end user.
I've got two. One, don't go at it alone, right? Find teams,
Yeah,
find
that's a good
partners that you can group up with, and you'll be able to get to your results in a much more meaningful way
Yeah.
and a much faster way. And the second one, I think, is it's okay to do something right. It's okay to do it wrong. It's not okay to not do anything.
So with that, I will close. And again, thank you for everyone attending, and we look forward to seeing you throughout the rest of the day's conference. Thank you.